The humans are laughing at us. That was the report that changed everything. President Elena Vasquez was supposed to be dead. The Vorthak had turned the White House into a smoking crater just 3 hours ago. Their massive ships, each one the size of Manhattan, had positioned themselves above every major city on Earth, casting shadows that swallowed the sun itself. The message was clear: surrender or die. But instead of surrender broadcasts, instead of pleas for mercy, instead of the terror that 43 other conquered species had shown, Earth's emergency frequencies were filled with something the Vorthak had never encountered before: laughter, actual human laughter. "Let me get this straight," came the voice from a bunker deep beneath the Colorado mountains, where President Vasquez had somehow survived the initial attack. "You massive alien bullies show up with your fancy ships, blow up our pretty buildings, and expect us to just roll over and play dead." The sound that followed wasn't fear. It wasn't desperation. It was the kind of laugh you hear right before someone does something incredibly stupid or incredibly brilliant. You've been watching us for how long? Centuries. And you still don't understand the first thing about humans. We've been sitting in this solar system for decades, not because we couldn't leave, but because we were waiting for someone interesting to show up, waiting for a real challenge. The Vorthak commander, Thex Vorthak Prime, felt something he hadn't experienced in his 1,000 years of conquest: confusion. Every species they had encountered begged, they negotiated, they tried to buy time. They never, ever laughed in the face of extinction. "So here's the thing about humans," Vasquez continued, her voice growing colder despite the humor. "We've spent our entire history being told we can't do something. Can't fly, can't go to space, can't survive, and every single time we've looked at impossible odds and said, 'Watch me.' Today isn't going to be any different." The year was 2087, and what the Vorthak didn't know was that humanity's age of peace hadn't been peaceful at all. It had been the most terrifying arms race in galactic history, and the Vorthak had just volunteered to be the test subjects. Because when you threaten a human's home, when you threaten their children, when you tell them they have no choice but to submit, you don't get fear. You don't get surrender. You get something far more dangerous. You get human creativity mixed with human fury, and that combination has never, in the entire history of the universe, ended well for the other guy. The beings that descended from those massive ships weren't like anything from our science fiction movies. The Vorthak stood nearly 9 feet tall, with bodies that seemed to be made of living metal and crystal. Their skin shifted between silver and deep purple, and where humans had eyes, they possessed clusters of sensor nodes that could see across every spectrum of light imaginable. But it wasn't their appearance that terrified our military leaders. It was their technology. These weren't your typical Hollywood aliens with ray guns and flying saucers. The Vorthak had mastered energy manipulation on a scale that made our nuclear weapons look like firecrackers. Their ships didn't just fly through space. They bent reality around them, creating pockets of distorted time and gravity that allowed them to appear anywhere on Earth within seconds. Our radar systems couldn't track them, our missiles couldn't lock onto them, and our most advanced fighter jets moved like snails compared to their scout vessels. Within the first hour of their arrival, intelligence reports flooded into the Pentagon, revealing the horrifying scope of their capabilities. A single Vorthak soldier could generate an energy field that stopped bullets in mid-air, then redirect that same energy as a weapon capable of melting through 6 feet of reinforced steel. Their personal armor wasn't just protective gear. It was a miniature ecosystem that could adapt to any environment, from the crushing depths of our oceans to the vacuum of space. But perhaps most unsettling was their complete indifference to human life. They didn't see us as enemies to be respected, or even as a threat to be eliminated quickly. To the Vorthak, humans were simply an inconvenient infestation standing between them and what they wanted, and what they wanted was everything. Earth's vast oceans represented the largest source of pure hydrogen in this sector of the galaxy, essential fuel for their civilization's expansion. Our planet's core contained rare metals that they needed for their quantum computers, materials so precious in their economy that a single Earth-sized planet could fund their military campaigns across a dozen star systems. They had been watching, just for centuries, waiting for the perfect moment to harvest what they needed. To them, the fact that billions of intelligent beings called this planet home was irrelevant. We were no more significant than the bacteria they would also be wiping out. The Vorthak strategy was as cold as it was efficient. They had conquered 43 other worlds using the same playbook, and it had never failed them. First, demonstrate overwhelming power by destroying military targets and government centers. Second, eliminate key infrastructure to prevent organized resistance. Third, offer the surviving population a simple choice: surrender and serve as a labor force, or face complete extinction. Most species chose submission after seeing what happened to those who resisted. The Vorthak had expected humanity to follow the same pattern, which is why they were genuinely puzzled when our response wasn't immediate surrender. Their commander, a being our linguists later learned was called Thex Vorthak Prime, transmitted what they considered a generous offer to every communication device on Earth simultaneously. The message was simple and delivered in perfect English, Spanish, Mandarin, and 24 other languages, proof they had been studying us far longer than we realized. Humanity had 72 hours to cease all resistance, dismantle our governments, and prepare for processing into their labor system. In exchange, they would preserve roughly 10% of our population as workers and breeders. The rest would be eliminated quickly and efficiently. To sweeten their offer, they demonstrated their power by targeting military installations across 6 continents simultaneously. In less than 30 minutes, they had destroyed every major naval, base Air Force installation, and missile defense system on Earth. The Pentagon, NORAD, and similar facilities in Russia, China, and Europe were reduced to smoking craters. Our most advanced weapon systems were turned into modern art sculptures of twisted metal and melted electronics. The message was clear. Resistance was not just futile, it was impossible. But as President Vasquez would soon demonstrate to these cosmic bullies, they had made one fundamental error in their calculations. The Vorthak had studied human technology, human governments, and human military capabilities. What they had never bothered to understand was the human spirit and how dangerous we become when someone threatens our home and our families. They were about to receive the most expensive education in galactic history. President Elena Vasquez had been in office for exactly 18 months when the Vorthak arrived, and nothing in her political career had prepared her for this moment. But her 25 years as a Marine, including 3 tours in the brutal resource wars of the 2070s, had taught her something invaluable: how to think clearly when everything around you is falling apart. While other world leaders were either dead, missing, or paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of their situation, Vasquez was already moving to her backup command center deep beneath the Colorado Mountains, coordinating with the few military assets that had survived the initial attack. The first thing she did was something no president in history had ever attempted. She dissolved the traditional chain of command and declared a global state of human emergency. Within 6 hours of the attack, she had established direct communication with the surviving leaders of Russia, China, India, Brazil, and the European Federation. These weren't allies. Some of these nations had been locked in cold conflicts with America for decades. But Vasquez understood something that the Vorthak didn't. When humanity's survival is at stake, old grudges become meaningless luxuries we can't afford. Her first global broadcast came 12 hours after the invasion began, transmitted through emergency networks that had been designed to survive nuclear war. She spoke directly to the camera, still wearing her torn and dusty presidential suit from the evacuation, her face streaked with ash from the destroyed White House. There were no teleprompters, no carefully crafted speeches written by committees, just one human being speaking to all of humanity in their darkest hour. She told the world about Project Prometheus, a classified research initiative that had been developing experimental weapons based on theoretical physics for the past decade. Originally designed as a deterrent against potential future human conflicts, these weapons had never been tested in real combat, but they represented humanity's only chance of fighting back against technology that was centuries ahead of our own. The project had been hidden across 17 different facilities on 6 continents, each one disguised as civilian research centers or industrial complexes. By some miracle, the Vorthak had missed most of these installations in their initial strikes, but Vasquez knew that weapons alone wouldn't win this war. The Vorthak had destroyed our traditional military structure, but they had underestimated the power of human adaptability. She announced the formation of the Global Resistance Network, a decentralized command structure that could operate even if every government on Earth was eliminated. Local communities would organize their own defense cells, connected through encrypted communication networks that used everything from ham radio to quantum-encrypted satellite feeds that the aliens hadn't learned to intercept yet. The evacuation of civilians began immediately, but this wasn't a retreat. It was a strategic repositioning. Underground facilities that had been built during the Cold War were reopened and expanded. Subway systems in major cities became underground highways for moving supplies and personnel. Abandoned mines were converted into manufacturing centers where human engineers worked around the clock to reverse engineer alien technology recovered from crashed scout ships. Perhaps most importantly, Vasquez authorized something that would have been unthinkable just days before: the complete sharing of military and scientific secrets between all nations. Russian nuclear physicists worked alongside American engineers. Chinese cybersecurity experts collaborated with Israeli intelligence operatives. Brazilian biologists shared research with German chemists. The artificial barriers that had divided humanity for centuries dissolved in the face of extinction. In her second broadcast, delivered 24 hours before the Vorthak deadline, President Vasquez spoke the words that would become the rallying cry of the resistance. Standing in a bunker surrounded by military leaders from every continent, she looked directly into the camera and delivered what historians would later call the most important speech in human history. She reminded humanity that we had always been at our best when facing impossible odds, that every great achievement in our history had come from refusing to accept that something couldn't be done. Her final words to the Vorthak were delivered in their own language, phonetically learned from captured communications. You wanted to know what humans are capable of when you threaten our home. You're about to find out. We do not go gentle into that good night. The first breakthrough came from the most unlikely place: a crashed Vorthak scout ship in downtown Mumbai that had been brought down by a lucky hit from an Indian Air Force pilot who rammed it with his fighter jet in a suicide attack. Dr. Priya Sharma, a quantum physicist who had been shopping for her daughter's birthday present when the invasion began, found herself crawling through the wreckage with a team of international scientists who had been assembled within hours of the crash. What they discovered changed everything. The Vorthak technology wasn't magic. It was just science so advanced that it seemed impossible to human understanding. But science has rules, and rules can be exploited. Their energy shields operated on a specific frequency range that created interference patterns with Earth's magnetic field. Their advanced sensors, so sophisticated they could track a single human heartbeat from orbit, were actually vulnerable to a type of quantum static that human radio equipment had been accidentally generating for decades. Most importantly, their ship's navigation systems relied on quantum entanglement with their homeworld, creating a communication lag that could be exploited if you knew exactly when and how to strike. Dr. Sharma's team shared their findings with resistance cells across the globe within hours. In hidden laboratories from the Swiss Alps to the Australian outback, human scientists began working on weapons that could exploit these weaknesses. They couldn't match Vorthak firepower, but they didn't need to. They just needed to level the playing field enough to give human courage and creativity a chance to work. The resistance strategy was unlike anything seen in human warfare before. Traditional military thinking focused on controlling territory, protecting assets and maintaining supply lines, but the Vorthak had made all of that impossible. Instead, humanity adopted what military historians would later call quantum guerrilla warfare, appearing everywhere and nowhere at once, striking with precision at critical moments, then vanishing into the civilian population before the aliens could respond. Underground networks that had originally been built for smuggling drugs and weapons during the resource wars were repurposed into supply lines that moved ammunition, food, and intelligence across continents. Hackers who had spent their careers breaking into corporate systems turned their skills toward intercepting and disrupting Vorthak communications. Urban exploration groups, who knew every tunnel, abandoned building, and forgotten subway line in major cities, became the guides who helped resistance fighters move unseen through occupied territories. The aliens had expected humans to fight like humans had always fought, with armies, tanks, and conventional strategies. Instead, they found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to be everywhere at once. A Vorthak patrol would be destroyed by a perfectly coordinated ambush in New York, and before they could send reinforcements, another patrol would disappear. In Tokyo, their supply depots would explode in London, while their communication arrays were being sabotaged in Sao Paulo. But the most effective weapon in humanity's arsenal wasn't any piece of advanced technology. It was something the Vorthak had never encountered in 43 previous conquests. Every other species they had defeated fought to preserve their civilization, their culture, their way of life. When those things were threatened, they eventually chose survival over principles. Humans fought for something different. They fought for each other. A mother in Detroit would risk everything to get intelligence about Vorthak movements to resistance fighters 3,000 miles away because someone else's children were in danger. A farmer in rural China would hide alien technology in his barn for months, knowing that discovery meant death because scientists in another country needed it to develop new weapons. Teenagers who had never held a weapon before would volunteer for suicide missions against alien installations because they couldn't bear the thought of their little brothers and sisters growing up as slaves. The Vorthak began to realize they were fighting something they had never encountered before, an entire species that was willing to sacrifice everything, not just for their own survival, but for the survival of beings they had never met and would never know. Their psychological warfare techniques, so effective against other species, were useless against humans who had already accepted that death was preferable to surrender. 3 weeks into the occupation, Vorthak casualty reports were climbing rapidly, while human resistance was growing stronger instead of weaker. For the first time in their military history, they were facing an enemy that became more dangerous as the fight continued. The prey species was acting like a predator, and their perfectly calculated invasion was becoming a grinding war of attrition that they had never planned to fight. Operation Terra Nova began at exactly 3:17 a.m., Greenwich Mean Time, on what would later be called Liberation Day. Across 17 time zones, human resistance cells launched simultaneous attacks against Vorthak positions using weapons that shouldn't have existed and tactics that defied every rule of conventional warfare. The aliens had been expecting scattered terrorist attacks, desperate gestures from a dying species. Instead, they found themselves facing a coordinated global offensive that had been planned with the precision of a Swiss watch and the fury of a mother protecting her children. President Vasquez had moved her command center to a decommissioned nuclear submarine that now operated from beneath the Arctic ice sheet. From this mobile fortress, she coordinated the most ambitious military operation in human history. The plan was insane by any reasonable standard. Simultaneous attacks on all 7 Vorthak motherships, while they were in their defensive formation above Earth's atmosphere. The window of opportunity would last exactly 14 minutes, the time it took for their quantum communication systems to reset after the electromagnetic pulse weapons that Dr. Sharma's team had developed specifically for this moment. The first wave consisted of modified intercontinental ballistic missiles that had been retrofitted with human-alien hybrid technology. These weren't the nuclear warheads that the Vorthak had easily defended against. They were quantum disruption devices that created temporary tears in space-time, essentially creating doorways that bypassed alien shield systems. The missiles weren't designed to destroy the motherships. They were designed to deliver boarding parties directly into the heart of enemy vessels. Vasquez herself led the assault on the primary mothership, commanding a strike team of volunteers who had trained for this moment in virtual reality simulations for weeks. These weren't professional soldiers. The Vorthak had killed most of those in the initial attacks. Her team included a former video game designer who had become an expert in alien ship layouts, a retired grandmother who happened to be a genius at quantum mechanics, and a 19-year-old hacker who could interface with Vorthak computer systems, better than their own technicians. The moment their assault craft materialized inside the alien vessel, everything went wrong according to plan. The Vorthak had expected human attacks to follow human military logic, secure the perimeter, advance methodically, minimize casualties. Instead, the boarding parties scattered in all directions, following routes that made no tactical sense to alien commanders, but were perfectly logical to humans who understood that sometimes the only way to win is to embrace chaos. While Vasquez's team fought through the ship's command center, similar battles were taking place inside 6 other motherships. In orbit above Asia, a team led by a former sumo wrestler and a computer programmer was using jury-rigged alien weapons to fight their way toward the ship's power core. Above Europe, resistance fighters who had learned to speak Vorthak were creating confusion by issuing contradictory orders through the ship's own communication system. The aliens found themselves fighting an enemy that didn't just refuse to follow the rules of warfare. They seemed to be making up entirely new rules as the battle progressed. The turning point came when Dr. Sharma, working from a hidden laboratory in the Himalayas, finally cracked the frequency signature of Vorthak quantum processors. The discovery came at the cost of her life. The experimental equipment she was using to analyze alien technology overloaded and killed her instantly. But in her final transmission, she sent the frequency data to every human position on Earth and in space. The effect was immediate and devastating to Vorthak systems. Their advanced computers, so sophisticated they could calculate the movement of individual atoms, suddenly couldn't perform basic functions. Shield systems failed, weapons powered down, and navigation computers began displaying what could only be described as alien blue screens of death. For the first time since their arrival, the Vorthak were vulnerable. But even with their technological advantage temporarily neutralized, the aliens were still formidable opponents. What followed was the most savage hand-to-hand combat in human history, fought in zero gravity, aboard ships where every surface could be a floor, wall, or ceiling depending on your orientation. Humans discovered that their lower gravity evolutionary background actually gave them an advantage in the cramped confines of alien vessels. They were more agile, more adaptable, and far more creative in their use of improvised weapons. The battle for the primary mothership became a running fight through corridors filled with exotic gases that burned human lungs and chambers where gravity shifted without warning. Vasquez found herself in personal combat with Thex Vorthak Prime himself, a being that outweighed her by 300 pounds and possessed strength that could crush steel. The fight should have been over in seconds. Instead, it lasted nearly 20 minutes, because the alien commander had never encountered an opponent who fought with such complete disregard for personal safety. When Vasquez finally managed to detonate the improvised explosive device that her team had carried to the ship's core, she was less than 50 feet from the blast. The explosion didn't just destroy the mothership, it created a cascade failure that spread to the other vessels through their quantum communication links. 7 alien motherships, each containing thousands of Vorthak soldiers and representing centuries of advanced technology, were reduced to expanding clouds of debris in Earth's orbit. But the victory came at a terrible price. Of the 847 humans who had volunteered for the boarding missions, only 23 survived. President Vasquez was not among them. The silence that followed the destruction of the Vorthak fleet was unlike anything Earth had ever experienced. For 47 days, alien ships had cast shadows across human cities. The constant hum of their engines had become the soundtrack of occupation, a reminder that humanity was no longer master of its own world. When that sound finally stopped, the absence was so profound that children who had grown up during the invasion cried because they thought something was wrong. President Elena Vasquez never lived to see the victory she had made possible, but her final transmission from the mothership became the defining moment of human triumph. As the ship's core began to overload, she managed to send one last message to Earth. Tell them we didn't go gentle. Tell them we went down fighting and we took these bastards with us. Her words were broadcast on every surviving communication system on the planet, and within hours they had been translated into every human language and carved into memorial walls that would stand for centuries. The cost of victory was staggering. Nearly 2 billion humans had died during the invasion and resistance. Every major city on Earth bore scars that would take decades to heal. The economic systems that had taken centuries to build were in ruins. But humanity had accomplished something that 43 other species across the galaxy had failed to do. They had not just survived contact with the Vorthak, they had destroyed them completely. In the months that followed, as Earth began the long process of rebuilding, scientists, studying the captured alien technology, made discoveries that revolutionized human understanding of physics, biology, and engineering. The same quantum frequencies that Dr. Sharma had used to disable Vorthak computers led to breakthroughs in faster-than-light communication. The energy shield technology was reverse-engineered to create unlimited clean power sources. Most importantly, the navigation systems from the destroyed motherships contained star charts showing the locations of other worlds the Vorthak had conquered. The debate that followed would define humanity's future in the stars. Some argued that Earth should focus on rebuilding and defending itself against future threats. Others, inspired by the sacrifice of President Vasquez and the thousands who had died fighting for freedom, believed that humanity had a responsibility to liberate the species still enslaved by other Vorthak fleets scattered across the galaxy. Decision came during a global referendum held exactly 1 year after Liberation Day. The vote wasn't even close. By a margin of 7-1, humanity chose to take their fight to the stars. The same species that had been dismissed as primitive by advanced alien civilizations was about to become the galaxy's newest and most dangerous force for liberation. The Vorthak had made one fatal error in their assessment of human nature. They had studied our technology, our governments, and our military capabilities, but they had never understood the fundamental truth that drove every human action. We are not just survivors, we are protectors. We fight not just for our own freedom, but for the freedom of others. We sacrifice not just for our own children, but for children we will never meet. As the first human starships launched toward distant worlds where enslaved species waited unknowingly for salvation, Earth's new president spoke words that would echo across the galaxy for generations. The Vorthak thought they were conquering a primitive species. Instead, they awakened something they never expected to encounter, a race that gets stronger every time someone tries to break it, and more dangerous every time someone threatens what it loves. The universe had been introduced to humanity, and nothing would ever be the same again. Because when humans decide to fight for something, they don't fight to survive. They fight to win, no matter the cost. And sometimes that makes all the difference between freedom and extinction,